The autumn wind cut through Redemption Creek like a blade, carrying with it the scent of dying leaves and desperation. 3 small figures huddled together on the courthouse steps, their thin shoulders pressed against each other as if their combined warmth could shield them from the world's cruelty. Emma, barely 8 years old, clutched her brother's hands with fierce determination. Tommy and Samuel, identical twins who had never spent a day apart, trembled not from the cold but from the fear that today might be their last together. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty town square, his words sharp as gunshots in the crisp morning air. Due to the outstanding debts of the deceased Robert Mitchell, these 3 orphaned children will be sold to cover his gambling losses. The debt stands at $400. Do I hear an opening bid? The crowd gathered like vultures, their faces a mixture of pity and opportunism. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched strange faces evaluate them like livestock. A woman in a faded blue dress stepped forward, her eyes cold as winter stones. I'll take the girl for $50. She's old enough to work in my boarding house. The twins instinctively moved closer to their sister, their small bodies forming a protective barrier. Tommy's voice cracked as he whispered, "We stay together, Em. We promised Papa." The auctioneer nodded, his gavel poised like a weapon. $50 for the girl. Any other bids? A rough-looking man in a torn coat raised his hand. I'll give you 30 for each boy. Need hands on my ranch. The children's world began to crumble around them, the reality of separation hitting like a physical blow. Just as the auctioneer raised his gavel for the final time, a quiet voice cut through the morning air like a prayer answered. Wait. Tall figure emerged from the shadows of the general store, his boots clicking against the wooden planks with measured steps. He wore a simple brown coat, weathered by years under the sun, and his hat was pulled low over eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. I'll pay the full debt. $400 for all 3 children. The crowd turned as one, murmurs rippling through the gathering like wind through wheat. The stranger's presence commanded attention not through loudness, but through an undeniable, quiet strength. His weathered hands reached into his coat pocket, producing a leather pouch that clinked softly with the weight of coins. Cash money, he said simply, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had learned that actions spoke louder than words. The auctioneer's eyes widened, clearly not expecting such a substantial offer. $400 for 3 orphans? Sir, that's quite generous, but are you certain? The stranger's gaze never wavered. I'm certain. These children belong together. Emma felt her brother's hands tighten in hers, hope flickering like a candle in the darkness. But who was this man, and what did he want with them? The question hung in the air like smoke, promising answers that would change everything. The stranger stepped forward, his movements deliberate and calm. Those who knew him whispered his name, Jacob Morrison, a man who had lost everything in the war and built something new from the ashes of his former life. He counted out the coins with methodical precision, each piece of silver catching the morning light like stars falling to earth. The auctioneer's greed overcame his curiosity as he snatched the money, his gavel falling with finality. Sold to Mr. Morrison for $400, he announced, his voice carrying across the square. The crowd began to disperse, some disappointed at losing potential workers, others relieved to avoid the burden of 3 hungry mouths. Jacob approached the children slowly, as one might approach a frightened animal. He knelt down to their level, his eyes meeting theirs with a gentleness that seemed almost foreign in this harsh land. My name is Jacob, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I know you're scared, and you have every right to be, but I want you to know something. I'm not taking you to work you to death or separate you, I'm taking you home. Emma searched his face for deception, for the cruelty she had learned to expect from adults. Instead, she found something she hadn't seen in months: genuine kindness. Tommy spoke up, his voice small but brave. Why? Why would you pay so much for us? Jacob was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant as if seeing something beyond the horizon. Because everyone deserves a chance at family, and because I know what it's like to be alone in this world. Samuel, who rarely spoke to strangers, surprised everyone by asking, "Are you going to hurt us?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Jacob's response would determine everything. He looked at each child in turn, his expression serious. "I give you my word. No harm will come to you under my roof. You'll have food, shelter, and each other. That's a promise." Emma felt something shift inside her chest, a tiny crack in the wall she had built around her heart. Could this stranger really be their salvation? Jacob stood and extended his hand to Emma. "My wagon's just over there. It's a long ride to my ranch, but there's hot coffee and warm blankets. What do you say?" Emma looked at her brothers, seeing her own desperate hope reflected in their eyes. Slowly, she reached out and took the stranger's hand. It was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who knew hard work but also gentleness. As they walked toward the wagon, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was either the answer to their prayers or the beginning of a different kind of nightmare. But for the first time in months, she dared to hope. The stranger had risked everything to keep them together, and that had to count for something. The question that would haunt her dreams was simple. What did Jacob Morrison really want with 3 orphaned children? The wagon ride to Jacob's ranch stretched across miles of rolling hills painted in autumn's amber palette. The children sat close together in the back, wrapped in wool blankets that smelled of lavender and hope. Jacob had given them each a piece of hardtack and a cup of warm milk, simple gestures that spoke volumes about his character. Emma watched him carefully as he guided the horses, noting how he spoke gently to the animals, how his hands were steady on the reins. "Where are we going?" Samuel asked, his voice carrying on the wind. Jacob turned slightly, his profile strong against the setting sun. "My ranch is about 20 miles north of town. It's not much to look at, but it's home." Tommy, ever practical, despite his young age, asked, "Do you have other children?" The question seemed to pain Jacob, and he was quiet for so long that Emma thought he wouldn't answer. "I had a family once," he finally said, his voice barely audible over the creaking wagon wheels. "Lost them to fever 3 years ago. Been alone ever since." The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. This man understood their pain, their loss. He wasn't just rescuing them. He was rescuing himself too. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jacob pointed toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. "There it is, the Morrison Ranch." Emma squinted through the gathering dusk and saw a modest wooden house with a wraparound porch, a barn, and several outbuildings. Smoke curled from the chimney, and warm light glowed from the windows. It looked like something from a dream. "It's beautiful," Emma whispered, and for the first time in months she meant it. Jacob's smile was small but genuine. "It will be once it has the sound of children's laughter again." The wagon pulled up to the front porch, and Jacob helped them down with careful hands. "Welcome home," he said simply, and Emma felt her heart skip a beat at the word she had feared she would never hear again. The interior of the house was warm and inviting, with handmade furniture and colorful quilts draped over the chairs. Jacob led them to a large kitchen where a pot of stew simmered on the stove, filling the air with the rich aroma of beef and vegetables. "You must be hungry," he said, ladling generous portions into bowls. "Eat as much as you want. There's plenty." Emma watched in amazement as her brothers' faces lit up at the sight of real food. They had been surviving on scraps and charity for so long that a hot meal seemed like a miracle. Jacob sat with them at the large wooden table, his presence both comforting and mysterious. "I know this is all strange," he said gently, "but I want you to know the rules of this house. They're simple. Treat each other with respect, help with chores when you're able, and never lie to me. Can you do that?" The children nodded solemnly, still not quite believing their good fortune. Jacob continued, "Tomorrow I'll show you around the ranch. There's plenty to do, but it's good work. Honest work. And Emma, I've set up a small room for you upstairs. The boys can share the room next to it. Each of you will have your own bed, and space for your things." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. Their own rooms, their own beds. It seemed too good to be true. "Mr. Morrison," she said hesitantly, "why are you being so kind to us?" Jacob's expression grew thoughtful, and he set down his spoon. "Because kindness is the only thing that makes this hard world bearable, and because I believe every child deserves a chance to grow up feeling safe and loved." That night, as Emma lay in her very own bed for the first time in months, she listened to the sounds of the ranch settling into sleep. The wind whistled through the eaves, cattle lowed in the distance, and somewhere in the house Jacob moved quietly through his evening routine. For the first time since her father's death, Emma felt something approaching peace. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm to their lives that felt almost magical in its simplicity. Jacob woke them each morning with the gentle sound of his voice and the promise of fresh biscuits and coffee. Emma learned to help with the cooking, her small hands growing skilled at kneading dough and stirring pots. The twins discovered they had a natural talent for working with the animals, and Jacob patiently taught them to milk the cows and gather eggs. Every day brought new lessons and small victories. Jacob showed them how to read the sky for weather, how to mend fences, and how to care for the horses. But more than that, he showed them how to be children again. He carved them wooden toys, told them stories by the fireplace, and never raised his voice in anger. When Tommy fell and scraped his knee, Jacob cleaned the wound with gentle hands and told him that scars were just proof that he was brave enough to try new things. Emma began to let her guard down, bit by bit. She found herself laughing at Jacob's terrible jokes, racing her brothers around the yard, and even humming while she worked. The constant tension that had lived in her shoulders began to ease, replaced by something she had almost forgotten: joy. Jacob seemed to bloom in their presence too, his quiet smiles becoming more frequent, his movements lighter. One evening, as they sat around the kitchen table playing a game of checkers, Samuel looked up at Jacob with wide eyes. "Are you going to be our papa now?" The question hung in the air like a prayer, and Emma held her breath waiting for the answer. Jacob's face grew soft, and he reached across the table to ruffle Samuel's hair. "If that's what you want, then yes. I'd be honored to be your papa." Emma felt something break open inside her chest, a flood of warmth and belonging that she had been holding back for weeks. "Really?" she whispered, afraid to believe it. Jacob nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Really. You're my family now, and I'm yours. Nothing will ever change that." For the first time since her father's death, Emma felt truly safe. The children threw themselves into ranch life with the enthusiasm of young hearts that had found their place in the world. They learned to ride horses, to read the brands on cattle, and to predict the weather by the behavior of the animals. Jacob taught them letters and numbers in the evenings, determined that they would have every opportunity in life that he could provide. But perhaps most importantly, they learned to trust. Again, Emma stopped flinching when adults raised their voices. Tommy and Samuel began to venture further from the house, confident that they would always have a safe place to return to. They were healing, all of them, finding wholeness in their shared commitment to each other and to the land they were learning to love. Jacob's patience seemed endless. When Emma had nightmares about the auction, he would sit by her bed until she fell back asleep. When the twins got into mischief, he guided them with firm but gentle correction. He never made them feel like burdens or reminded them of what their care cost him. Instead, he made them feel like the greatest gift he had ever received. The ranch began to feel like more than just a place to live. It became a sanctuary, a world where 3 orphaned children could grow into themselves without fear. Emma started to plan for the future, imagining herself as a grown woman who might one day run a ranch of her own. The twins talked about becoming horse trainers or cattle drivers, their dreams expanding to match their growing confidence. One afternoon, as autumn turned toward winter, Emma found Jacob sitting on the porch staring out at the horizon with a troubled expression. "Is something wrong?" she asked, settling beside him on the wooden steps. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, then sighed deeply. "I hope not, Em. I surely hope not." His words carried a weight that made her stomach clench with familiar fear. "What do you mean?" she pressed, but Jacob only shook his head. "Probably nothing. Just old worries. But Emma had learned to read the signs of adult distress, and she knew that something was coming. Something that might threaten the fragile happiness they had built together. The question was whether they were strong enough now to face whatever storm was approaching. The storm arrived on a cold December morning in the form of 3 riders approaching the ranch at a gallop. Emma was in the kitchen helping Jacob prepare breakfast when the sound of hoofbeats made them both freeze. Through the window, she could see the men dismounting, their faces hard and purposeful. One of them wore a badge that caught the morning light, a federal marshal. "Children, go to your rooms," Jacob said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "Stay there until I come for you." Emma wanted to protest, to demand answers, but something in Jacob's expression told her this was not the time for questions. She gathered her brothers and herded them upstairs, but she pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear the conversation below. "Jacob Morrison?" The marshal's voice was official, cold. "I'm Marshal Williams. I have a warrant for your arrest." Emma's blood turned to ice. "On what charges?" Jacob's voice was steady, but she could hear the tension underneath. "Kidnapping. 3 children were reported missing from an auction in Redemption Creek. The legal guardian who won the bidding claims you stole them." The world tilted on its axis. Emma's mind raced as she tried to understand what she was hearing. Someone was claiming to be their legal guardian, someone who had won them at auction. But Jacob had paid the full debt. She had seen the money change hands. "That's impossible," Jacob said, his voice rising slightly. "I paid the full debt. $400. I have witnesses. The man who claims to be their guardian says the auction was illegal, says he had already filed papers to take custody of the children before the auction took place. He's demanding they be returned to him immediately." Emma felt like she was drowning, like the floor was falling away beneath her feet. After all these months of safety, of belonging, someone was trying to tear them away from the only real home they had ever known. "Who is this man?" Jacob demanded. "Marcus Blackwood. He runs a mine operation up in Colorado. Claims the children's father owed him money, and he has the right to collect through their labor." Emma's breath caught. Marcus Blackwood, she remembered that name. He had been one of her father's gambling associates, a man with cold eyes and cruel hands. Her father had always avoided him when he could. "Those children are not property," Jacob said, his voice deadly quiet. "They're human beings, and they belong with me." The marshal's voice was apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Morrison. I can see you care about them. But the law is the law. I have to take them back to town until this gets sorted out." Emma heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly moved away from the door, her brothers' frightened faces reflecting her own terror. Jacob appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I'm so sorry, but we have to go back to town. There's been some kind of legal challenge." "No," Emma said, her voice breaking. "No, we're not going back. This is our home. You're our papa." Jacob knelt down and pulled all 3 children into a fierce embrace. "I am your papa, and nothing will ever change that. But we have to follow the law for now. I promise you, I will not let anyone take you away from me. Do you understand? I will fight for you with everything I have." The marshal was patient but insistent, and within an hour, they were back in the wagon heading toward town. But this time the journey felt like a funeral procession. Emma held her brothers close, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "We'll be okay," she told them. "Papa Jacob won't let anything happen to us." But even as she said the words, she could feel their newly built world crumbling around them. Back in Redemption Creek, they were taken to the same courthouse where their nightmare had begun. Marcus Blackwood was waiting for them, his presence filling the room like a dark cloud. He was a large man with graying hair and eyes like chips of ice. Emma remembered him now, remembered the way he had looked at children like they were tools to be used and discarded. "So these are Robert Mitchell's brats," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "They'll do nicely for the mine work. Strong backs, and they'll be grateful for the chance to work off their daddy's debt." Emma felt bile rise in her throat. This man saw them as nothing more than free labor, a way to recoup money he claimed he was owed. Jacob stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "Over my dead body," he said quietly. "These children are not going anywhere with you." Blackwood laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Morrison, you're a fool. You paid good money for what was never legally for sale. The auction was conducted without proper paperwork. I had already filed a claim for these children's custody." The judge, a tired-looking man named Harrison, shuffled through the papers on his desk. "Mr. Blackwood does appear to have filed the proper documentation," he said reluctantly. "However, Mr. Morrison, your payment was accepted in good faith. This is a complex legal situation." Emma felt hope flicker in her chest. Maybe there was a way out of this nightmare, Your Honor, Jacob said, his voice carrying the weight of desperate determination. "I ask for time to review Mr. Blackwood's claim and to verify the legitimacy of his documents. These children have been living with me for months. They've built a life, a family. Surely their well-being should be considered in this matter. What do you think should happen to these children? Should they be forced to honor a debt they never agreed to? Or should love and family bonds take precedence over legal technicalities? The answer might surprise you because in the Wild West, justice wasn't always found in law books. Sometimes it was found in the courage of ordinary people willing to stand up for what was right." Judge Harrison looked from Jacob to Blackwood, then down at the three children who stood at the center of this legal battle. Emma could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between legal obligation and moral clarity. "I'm willing to grant a delay," he said finally. "1 week. Mr. Morrison, you have 7 days to challenge Mr. Blackwood's claim. Mr. Blackwood, you will wait for my final ruling before taking custody of these children." Blackwood's face twisted with rage. "This is ridiculous. I have legal documents." The judge's gavel silenced him. "My courtroom, my rules. 7 days." Emma felt a small surge of hope. 7 days wasn't much, but it was something. Jacob had proven he could work miracles. Maybe he could work another one. As they left the courthouse, Blackwood blocked their path. "Enjoy your week, Morrison," he said with a cruel smile. "Because when I get those children, they'll work every day until they've paid off every penny of their daddy's debt. And children can work a long time." Emma shuddered at the malice in his voice. This man would destroy them, would steal their childhood and their hope. That night, back at the ranch, Jacob paced the kitchen like a caged animal. "There has to be something," he muttered. "Some way to prove his claim is fraudulent." Emma, who had been quiet all evening, suddenly spoke up. "Papa Jacob, what if we could prove that Mr. Blackwood is lying about the debt?" Jacob stopped pacing and looked at her with sharp attention. "What do you mean?" Emma took a deep breath, her mind racing. "Papa, my real papa, he kept records of all his debts. He was very careful about that. He always said a man's word was his bond, and he wrote down every penny he owed and to whom. If Mr. Blackwood is lying about the debt, there would be no record of it." Jacob's eyes lit up with possibility. "Where would these records be?" Emma's heart sank. "They were in our house, but after Papa died, everything was sold to pay his debts. I don't know what happened to his papers." Jacob ran his hands through his hair, thinking hard. "Who handled the sale of your father's property?" "Mr. Henderson at the bank," Tommy said suddenly. "He was the one who came to the house and made lists of everything." Jacob grabbed his coat. "Children, I want you to stay here with Mrs. Patterson. From next door. I'm going to town to have a conversation with Mr. Henderson." "Can we come?" Samuel asked hopefully. Jacob shook his head. "Too dangerous. If Blackwood sees you in town, he might try to take you before the week is up. Stay here, where you're safe." Emma watched him go with a mixture of hope and terror. Their fate hung in the balance, and they could only wait and pray that Jacob could find the proof they needed. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Jacob returned from town with a leather folder tucked under his arm and a grim smile on his face. "Mr. Henderson is a very thorough man," he said, settling the folder on the kitchen table. "He kept copies of all your father's financial records. Every debt, every payment, every transaction. Emma's heart hammered as Jacob opened the folder and spread out the papers. According to these records, your father owed money to the general store, the feed and grain, the doctor, and the saloon. But there's no record of any debt to Marcus Blackwood. Nothing at all. The implications hit Emma like a thunderbolt. He's lying. He's been lying about everything. More than that, Jacob said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I did some checking on Mr. Blackwood. He's facing investigation for using child labor in his mines. He's desperate for workers, and he saw your auction as an opportunity to get free labor under the guise of legal debt collection. Emma felt sick. They had been pawns in a game they didn't even know they were playing. But we have proof now, Tommy said hopefully. We can show the judge that Mr. Blackwood is lying. Jacob nodded, but his expression remained troubled. We can try, but Blackwood is a wealthy man with connections. He might have ways of making problems disappear. Emma refused to let despair take hold. We have to try. We have to fight for our family. The word family seemed to give Jacob strength. He straightened his shoulders and looked at each of them in turn. You're right. We're going to fight, and we're going to win. Because some things are more important than money or legal documents. Some things are worth everything. Emma felt a surge of fierce love for this man who had become their father in every way that mattered. The final hearing was set for Friday morning, and the entire town seemed to know about it. Word had spread about the quiet cowboy who had bought 3 orphans to save them from separation, and about the mining boss who wanted to claim them as property. Public opinion was clearly on Jacob's side, but Emma knew that public opinion didn't always carry weight in a courtroom. Thursday night, Jacob sat the children down for a serious conversation. Tomorrow we're going to tell the truth, he said, simply. All of it. We're going to show the judge those financial records, and we're going to explain what kind of man Marcus Blackwood really is. But I want you to understand. Even if we lose, even if the worst happens, you will always be my children. Nothing can change that. Emma felt tears streaming down her face. We know, Papa. And you'll always be our father, no matter what happens. The twins nodded solemnly, their young faces showing a maturity that had been forced upon them by circumstance. We're not afraid, Tommy said bravely. We're together, and that's what matters. Friday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of day that seemed to hold infinite possibilities. The courthouse was packed with townspeople who had come to witness the final confrontation between Jacob Morrison and Marcus Blackwood. Emma held her brother's hands as they walked to the front of the courtroom, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon them. Judge Harrison called the court to order, and Jacob stood to present his evidence. He spoke clearly and calmly, laying out the financial records that proved Robert Mitchell had never owed Marcus Blackwood a single penny. He presented testimonies from townspeople who had witnessed Blackwood's cruel treatment of children in his employ. He painted a picture of a man who saw children as commodities, not as human beings deserving of love and protection. Blackwood fought back with bluster and legal technicalities, but his arguments began to crumble under the weight of evidence. When Judge Harrison asked him to produce any written documentation of the debt he claimed, Blackwood could only offer vague promises and accusations. The truth was becoming clear to everyone in the courtroom. Marcus Blackwood was a liar and a would-be kidnapper. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Mr. Blackwood, your claim is not only unsupported by evidence, it appears to be entirely fraudulent. I hereby dismiss your petition for custody and order you to leave these children alone. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the territorial authorities for investigation into your business practices. Emma felt her knees go weak with relief. Mr. Morrison, the judge continued, while the original auction may have been conducted irregularly, your payment was made in good faith, and more importantly, it's clear that these children have found a loving home with you. I hereby grant you full legal custody of Emma, Tommy, and Samuel Mitchell Morrison. The courtroom erupted in applause, and Emma felt like she was floating on air. Blackwood stormed out of the courtroom, his face purple with rage, but Emma barely noticed. She was too busy hugging her brothers and her father, tears of joy streaming down her face. They had won. They were safe. They were a family, legally and completely. As they walked out of the courthouse into the brilliant morning sunlight, Jacob stopped and looked down at his children with eyes full of love. "Well," he said with a smile that could have lit up the entire territory, "I guess it's time to go home." Emma had never heard 4 words that sounded more beautiful. The months that followed were filled with the kind of happiness that Emma had thought existed only in fairy tales. Spring came to the ranch with an explosion of wildflowers and new life. The cattle thrived, the horses grew strong, and the children bloomed like flowers in the desert after rain. Emma learned to read and write with a fluency that amazed Jacob, while the twins became skilled horsemen and cattle handlers. But more than their practical skills, the children developed something even more precious: the confidence that comes from being unconditionally loved. Emma began to dream of becoming a teacher, inspired by Jacob's patient lessons and his belief in the power of education. Tommy discovered a talent for working with his hands, crafting beautiful pieces from wood and metal. Samuel showed a natural gift for understanding animals, able to calm the most skittish horse with just his voice and gentle touch. Jacob watched their growth with the pride of a father who had never dared to hope for such blessings. The ranch house filled with laughter and music, with the sounds of children playing and learning and becoming themselves. Neighbors would often comment on the transformation, not just of the children but of Jacob himself, who had gone from being a lonely, haunted man to someone who radiated contentment and purpose. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Samuel asked the question that had been in all their hearts. "Papa, do you think our real father would be proud of us?" Jacob considered the question carefully, understanding its importance. "I think he would be very proud," he said finally. "Not just of who you've become, but of the courage you showed. In the darkest times, he gave you something precious, the ability to love and be loved even when everything seemed hopeless." Emma felt a sense of peace settle over her, the last of her old fears finally laid to rest. She had spent so long afraid that happiness was temporary, that love was something that could be taken away without warning. But now she understood that the love they had built together was stronger than any threat, more enduring than any legal document. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, becoming known throughout the territory as a place where fine horses were raised and honest. Dealing was guaranteed, but more than that, it became a symbol of something precious. The idea that family wasn't just about blood but about choice, commitment, and the daily decision to love and support each other. As the years passed, the story of the quiet cowboy, who had saved 3 orphans from being sold into servitude, became legend in that part of the country. People would tell it to their children as an example of how one person's courage could change the world. But for Emma, Tommy, and Samuel, it wasn't a legend. It was simply the story of how they found their home. Years later, when Emma had become a respected teacher, Tommy a skilled craftsman, and Samuel a renowned horse trainer, they would still gather on the porch of the ranch house every evening to watch the sunset. Jacob, now showing silver in his hair but still strong and gentle, would sit among them, surrounded by the children and grandchildren who had filled their lives with even more love than they had thought possible. The debts of the past had been paid not with money or labor, but with love, loyalty, and the simple decision to choose family over fear. In the end, that had made all the difference. The quiet cowboy who had once lost everything had found something infinitely more valuable, a legacy of love that would echo through generations, proving that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is simply the courage to care for one another. On warm evenings when the wind carries the scent of sage and the distant sound of cattle settling for the night, visitors to the Morrison Ranch can still feel the presence of that love. It lives in the laughter of children, in the patient lessons passed from one generation to the next, and in the enduring truth that family is not something you are born into. It's something you choose to build, one day at a time, with courage, commitment, and an unwavering belief in the power of love to overcome any obstacle. If this story touched your heart, Consider subscribing to hear more tales of courage, love, and redemption from the American frontier, where ordinary people did extraordinary things and proved that the human spirit can triumph over any adversity.